Okay, so it's 10 a.m. My clock, so I want to welcome everybody for coming and joining us to celebrate innovative research in international education. Today's session will feature a presentation by Dr. Tang T. Heng, the recipient of the 2021 Teaching, Learning, and Scholarship Knowledge Communities Innovative Research in International Education Award. My name is Jiyoung Jang, and I am the current chair of the Teaching, Learning, and Scholarship, or TLS, Knowledge Community, or KC. We often call ourselves TLS KC, and you'll hear that throughout the session. I'm joined today by my fellow TLS KC member leaders, including Dr. Holly Carter. Holly, if you want to, yes, thank you, the TLS KC past chair, and Dr. Melissa Watley, the TLS KC's Research and Scholarship Network leader. Also, many thanks to Dr. Shana Sabert, the Associate Director of Research and Scholarship at NAFSA, for providing administrative support for this session and being a TLS KC staff partner. I now invite my colleague, Dr. Watley, to speak a bit about the TLS KC Award.
Hi, everyone. So each year the TLS KC, oh, hold on. Let me adjust my screen. All right. So each year the TLS KC celebrates and recognizes new and innovative research from any discipline that demonstrates a potential or proven impact on the field of international education. One author's publication in the form of either a book chapter or journal article is selected for recognition from a competitive slate of submissions for the TLS KC Innovative Research in International Education Award. Submissions are now being accepted for the 2022 award, and we're pleased to be able to provide insights and answer any questions about the award or award process. If you'll enter whatever questions you have in the chat, we will get to as many as we can throughout the session today. The TLS KC Award is one of 6 NAFSA Knowledge Community Awards that are currently accepting submissions until February 1st, 2022. With a few exceptions, nearly everyone is welcome to apply or be nominated for the award. If you've recently published either a journal article or chapter in an edited volume that is based on a research endeavor, or are familiar with someone else's work that deserves recognition, we hope that you will consider submitting for the TLS Research Award. Full criteria for the award process are available on our website, and we'll post a link in the chat momentarily so that you can take a look if you're interested. But essentially, the research should be applicable to the field of international education, should be applicable and innovative. It should inform applied practice or contribute to international education scholarship that is considered useful to practitioners. So again, submissions for the award and all the other open NAFSA awards are open through February 1st, 2022. If you have questions, we'll have a dedicated Q&A period towards the end of today's event where you can ask them. Again, you can also pop those in the chat and we will answer as many questions as we can. And then you can also email us at tlskc@nafsa.org, and I'll put that email address in the chat momentarily.
All right, thank you, Melissa. So this peer-to-peer perspective event is designed to highlight innovative research relevant to the field of international education. Today, we are proud to welcome Dr. Tang T. Heng to talk about her award-winning research. Dr. Heng is an assistant professor at the National Institute of Education, Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. In her work, she recognizes social-cultural context and highlights issues related to diversity and education through a comparative and international education lens. Her research on how Chinese international undergraduates experience U.S. college education compels her to move away from deficit perspectives to strength-based perspectives, supporting socio-culturally attuned approaches to and understanding of international students. This is evidenced in her both the research article for which she received the 2021 TLS KC Innovative Research in International Education Award, titled Socio-Culturally Attuned Understanding of and Engagement with Chinese International Undergraduates, and the November 2021 issue of Trends and Insight that she wrote toward greater reflexivity in engagement and research with international students. You can read more about Dr. Heng and her many accolades and accomplishments in her profile on the NAFSA website. Any questions for Dr. Heng can be put in the chat, as we will also have time for Q&A after her presentation. Due to the time difference between the United States and Singapore, we'll be playing a recording of Dr. Heng's presentation, but she will be joining us for a live Q&A after the presentation.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Hello, everyone. It's my pleasure to be speaking with the NAFSA community. I'm excited to be here to dialogue with the community on ways to support and engage international students. Given that this is a peer-to-peer sharing, I hope to close the distance by making this sharing a little less informal and less traditional. I will begin my sharing today with a personal anecdote. I'm sure it will come as no surprise to many of you if I said I was an international student myself. Yet, I was an international student long before I set foot in the US. I grew up in Singapore. In 1996, I flew to London, England to pursue my bachelor's in geography. It was my first time in England, so everything felt immensely foreign to me. As you can imagine, there was a whole new world that I had to adjust to. When my British friends told me to head to Boots to buy a shampoo, I was baffled at why anyone would head to a shoe store to pick up shampoo. These were the small adjustments I had to learn to get used to on a daily basis, including learning how to eat British food, which, as many of you are aware of, is not something very exciting to be shouting about. This was an era before Jamie Oliver and Gordon Ramsay made British food sexier. In fact, these pictures of fish and chips and bread and butter pudding look way more palatable than the greasy mush I was eating in my college. Other than having to adjust to new stores, services, cuisines, accents, etc., of course there was school. My education in Singapore was conducted primarily in English. Singapore education used and still uses the Cambridge O and A-level curriculums. I studied English literature in school. I read Jane Austen's novels, Shakespeare's plays, Wordsworth's poetry about daffodils. Yet, despite all these exposure and education, I was struggling in school. In the first 2 years of undergraduate, I would see a string of B's and C's. I could not understand how, as a student who wrote all her exams in English in Singapore and who did well enough to get a scholarship to study in England, I was struggling with doing well in college. I would often see feedback such as, "Where is your voice? What's your argument?" And I would wonder what exactly my professors meant. At that point, it didn't struck me to ask my tutors what it meant. Much as I felt depressed and shaken by my poor grades, by my final year, with the help of some friends and a committed tutor, I finally realized I had to insert myself, my positionality, and my arguments into the essays I was writing. I've always thought that I needed to respect the views of authors I wrote and to extract myself from the writing to remain balanced and neutral. I was relieved to be able to graduate with grades that were satisfactory to my scholarship funder. What is the point that I'm making with this personal anecdote? It is that international students' experiences matter, as they may create long-term repercussions we are not initially aware of. I was one of 3 international students in my cohort of 80 geography students. 26 years on from my studies in England, I can still vividly recall the heart palpitation I felt whenever I have to speak up in the tutorial setting, as I struggled to remember what I had to say and articulate it with a British accent so that my peers could understand me. I remember my other 4 tutorial group mates who were all white British blokes and who, other than one, never bothered to start a conversation with me. I remember my tutor telling me Singapore and Australia are but ex-British colonies, and who wants to go to Australia anyway? That's where the British ship their convicts to. I can still remember standing in front of the poster I had prepared during my cohort's learning festival and feeling so utterly insignificant and small as most of my British peers walked past me as if I were invisible. I had a handful of British friends, mostly minority British students whose parents came from Pakistan or India, or who did not have the poshest of English accents. Of course, it's not all horrible. The one tutorial bloke who bothered speaking with me has now become a lifelong friend, as with another friend who invited me to her home. I learned to become a better writer and speaker. I participated in ballroom dancing competitions. I remember the kindness of other European international students who welcomed me into their communities. I have fond memories of London, and I consider it the place that I grew up to become an adult. In 2005, I flew from Singapore to New York for my master's. This time, I felt much better prepared for my graduate experiences. After a few years working in New York, I returned to school to pursue my doctorate. I thought I was going to study Singapore teachers' understanding of curriculum for my doctorate. Yet, I eventually completed my dissertation examining how mainland Chinese students experience college education in the US. This was not something I had expected at all. It is when I've completed my dissertation and in preparing for sharings like these today that I come to realize how subtle one's experiences can influence one's eventual actions and choices. This brings me to my second point. It is that international students' experiences matter, as they may create long-term repercussions we are not aware of. More than 10 years ago, I read Bartlett and Fisher's article and was struck by this comment by one of her interviewees. This was something that stayed with me, for I often wondered what other impressions were left in the millions of international students' minds that stuck with them, and how it affected their attitudes and behaviors towards the people and country that they had studied in. Returning to graduate school in the US, I saw how my mainland Chinese peers struggled in the classroom, and it reminded me of my own experiences. When an American friend complained to me that she found her Korean groupmate selfish because she did not wish to contribute to group discussions, I wondered how I could better help them understand where they were each coming from. When at work or at conferences, when I hear of colleagues talking about how China would take over the US, I wondered how I could help with bridging understanding on both sides beyond that of fear and competition. This was how my eventual research was born. I came to realize the importance of understanding sociocultural contexts when relating with someone from a different country and culture. Much of the work around international students in the US up to a decade ago focused on the experiences and problems of international students. However, the research does not go deep enough to investigate the plethora of reasons behind the problems. Holt alludes to this as the complaints and troubles talk, and I've argued in my previous research that we need to be careful of only discussing international students' problems, as this may perpetuate a deficit narrative around them, which students may inevitably internalize or grow to resent. At the same time, it exhibits ethnocentrism on our parts, as we're constantly looking for gaps in international students based on our yardstick. To overcome ethnocentrism, empathize with students' issues, and better support their needs, we need to grow our sociocultural sensitivities to become more socioculturally attuned to students' experiences. Sociocultural is a combination of the words social and cultural. Becoming socioculturally attuned means to constantly understand how the society and culture shape someone's life. For instance, how environmental influences, societal pressures, language or culture shape one's behaviors and values. Becoming socioculturally attuned means not only asking us to reflect on how society and culture shapes international students, but also how we have been shaped by our own society and culture. Sensitivity to both contexts is essential as it helps us understand how our behaviors and values overlap or diverge across different contexts. Before I say more about examples of socioculturally attuned understanding of international students, I would like to give some quick context. This research is a subset of a larger research that involved 18 Chinese international undergraduate students across 3 colleges. The research sought to study how these students experienced their college education in the US, particularly paying attention to their interpretations behind the challenges they face, how they responded to their challenges, and how they changed over time. I would like to give some examples of socioculturally attuned interpretations from the research article for which NAFSA TLS had kindly conferred to me the Innovative Research Award in 2021. When my research participants were asked to explain the reasons for their challenges, they alluded to three different key themes: cultural legacies, prior schooling experiences, and societal demands. For instance, when asked why classroom participation was difficult for them, they alluded to various reasons. Firstly, there is the issue of language. New to English, by the time they had understood the conversation and constructed their responses, the discussion might have moved on. Secondly, they explained that discussions were not the norm in classroom in China. Hence, they have not had a chance to learn to respond quickly and to weigh in with their opinions. Also, they are uncertain of how to enter and exit discussions politely. Third, they explained that they have had trouble understanding some of the sociocultural references, be it to Christianity or to pop culture or politics. We may be contented with these explanations and think that it's a language problem or an educational difference problem because they don't speak English or they focus on rote learning. Yet, it may be helpful to ask, why is it that education in China does not focus on discussions? The why helps us to probe deeper into their contexts. Participants explained that in their classrooms, there can be up to 40 to 50 students in class for schools in the coastal areas, or up to 70 students in class in inland schools. Hence, they empathize with teachers regarding the difficulty of managing discussions in a large classroom. So, what we see is the impact of a large population size filtering down to a larger classroom size in school. They also explained that the national syllabus is extremely content-heavy. As such, there is much information to teach and learn, with little room for discussions, as these can be time-consuming. And because the Chinese Common Entrance Examination, a standardized national exam, determines the college they can go to and consequently their life opportunities, it comes as no surprise that both teachers and students are consumed by it. And when I probed about their thoughts about the entrance examination, participants defended it, arguing that it was the most fair way for managing a country of 1.4 billion people. Participants also alluded to the issue of history. For instance, they mentioned that history is taught via memorization with few discussions because China has an extremely long history of more than 3,000 years. By the time they have identified the various periods and incidences in history, they have very little room for discussion. On top of that, culturally, they explained that sometimes they find it rude to interrupt or disagree with other people. They talked about the need to give face to their peers and teachers. This means not to put their peers or teachers in an awkward position. For to them, it is important to maintain harmony in a community as it is a value that is privileged in their culture. These examples around students' challenges of classroom discussion that I've raised offer an insight into a different world. There are many other insights. However, in view of time, I'll not be able to give other examples and would like to point you to a few articles at the end of my slides for your reference. As someone who did not grow up in China, but who has worked and traveled there, participants' responses were illuminating on so many levels. For someone like me who grew up in a country with 5 million people, I could not have imagined what it was like to live in a country of 1.4 billion. When I hear more about the context within which international students grow up, I begin to understand why they face the challenges they do when studying abroad. So, how can we better support and engage with international students? For one, I think we need to learn to become more socio-culturally attuned ourselves. It is about honing a certain reflectivity that can be enhanced by pausing to ask ourselves questions such as, why might international students be behaving in particular ways? What am I assuming about them? Why do I have these assumptions? When we ask these questions, we're reminding ourselves that our ways of thinking and doing may not be the only way, and we're reminding ourselves to see the world through a different lens. Next, we need to assume that international students have strengths, not just deficits. When we ask questions like, what are their strengths? How can we leverage on their strengths to help overcome their challenges? We are respecting them and their culture. On our ends, it would also be helpful to be more curious about their backgrounds. Participants in my research told me they wished people would be more interested in them. They're shy in offering their opinions freely because they're not sure what is the appropriate social norms and hope that others could take some initiative in asking. I recall a conversation with my ex-professor. I had asked how the college had changed, and she mentioned, well, there are a lot more international students now, especially Chinese students. So, what did she do? She said she read Lenora Chu's book, Little Soldiers, which is about an American boy in a Chinese school and the author's perspective on parenting and education in China. And she thought, oh, that's why. That's why my students have the issues that they do in class. From there, she tweaked the way in which she taught them so as to support her students in transitioning to graduate school. Thus, understanding how some of our international students live or grew up through books, documentaries, movies, or the news can help us better grasp what they are going through. Next, we need to involve international students in the provisions we make for them so that the conversation is bi and not one-directional. McKay et al. Shared about how they asked international students for their opinions of what they needed and organized a cultural awareness and knowledge exchange scheme. Activities included weekly lunchtime workshops on local dialect, workshops on topics international students themselves proposed, as well as cooking exchanges. At the same time, in the provision of services, we may also need to be more culturally sensitive. For instance, offering halal options for Muslim students or non-alcoholic events. Karime and Matus found that chocolate-themed activities were most successful in attracting international and domestic students. So this is something for all of us to consider. At the University of Toronto, upon realizing that international students are afraid of stigmatization if they visited mental health professions, they came up with a 24-hour online mental health consultation program in 146 languages so as to be inclusive. We may also want to pay attention to how we label some of these services. For instance, an international student once told me she was extremely offended when she asked the International Student Office how she could get more academic support and was pointed to the Learning Disability Office. She was shocked, saying that she didn't have learning disabilities, that she merely wanted some academic ideas. In conclusion, through today's sharing, I hope that through my personal anecdotes as well as research on international students, you have gained insights on the importance of being more socioculturally attuned, as well as some ideas on how we can open our own minds as well as infuse this disposition in the programs and support we offer to our international students. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to engaging with you in the Q&A.
Thank you so much for sharing your research with us today, Dr. Heng. For all attendees, we're reviewing the questions submitted, so please post your questions in the chat. Dr. Holly Carter, the TLS KC past chair, will be moderating the Q&A shortly. To start the Q&A, Melissa and I have a couple of questions before we switch over to questions from the audience. So Dr. Heng, your stories have brought up so many memories that I had from my early days as international student myself. And I think this socially and culturally appropriate and sensitive approaches to, supporting international students is really at the heart of, what we're really trying to, establish here in the higher education. At the same time, it's not as easy as it sounds. And my question is twofold. Based on your personal experience, what kind of approaches, services, or programs helped you the most to adjust to the host culture in the UK and the US? And now that you are serving as a professor at a university, how has this new role changed or shaped your view toward international students and the support services within higher education?
All right, thank you very much, Jiyoung. And hello, everybody. Here you see me live again. Your questions is twofold, right? The first is about the kind of services or programs that you felt that had benefited me myself as an international student, and how, now as a professor, how things have changed. So I think there are several things that helped me as an international student. Activities and workshops that I participated in, So I remember when I was an international student in school, I would actually attend all these different workshops on, for example, how do you write CVs for an international student, or how do you network for international students, or how do you interview as an international student. And I find these workshops extremely helpful because it created this space for me to actually dialogue about questions that I worried about, whether or not, other people had these same concerns on my mind. So when I was in this room with fellow international students, I felt like I could speak more freely. So I think having such kind of workshops where there's a safe space for international students can be extremely helpful. I mean, I also really enjoyed engaging in activities in the school, not just workshops. So it's things, activities that the school organized. So for example, I remember very fondly my experience with, back then it was called Metro International. Now I think it's been rebranded several years ago, and now it's called One to World. They had this global classroom education program, and I really, really enjoyed that because I was volunteering in that, and I actually met fellow international students, learned more about their own countries and their cultures. But at the same time, I could also go into schools in New York City when I was an international student there to share about my own country and my own culture and my own language and experiences. And that was something I felt, that I felt like I had a sense of agency. There was something in me that, I could share something about myself. It's not just me learning about the US. So I think opportunities like that are very helpful. The second question, the second part of the question is that of as a professor, how did my own personal experiences shape how, how I interact with students now? I mean, I think it has profoundly shaped how I interact with students now. And I wouldn't say it's just international students, it's all students. So I think it's about this level of sensitivity and awareness about what my students' challenges are. So for example, for my international students, definitely I try to speak slower in the classroom. Or I know in the case of Singapore, people love using acronyms in Singapore. There are tons of acronyms that I use. And I know that my international students struggle when, when their peers use these acronyms in the classroom. So it means that, in the beginning of the module, I would actually be setting some collaborative norms or reminding students that, oh, you might want to remember not to use acronyms as often because, not everybody in here know these acronyms within our context. And when students, make social cultural references to things that may be difficult or foreign, or they use colloquial language, I will actually ask my students to actually translate it for their peers. So I think it's about this kind of sensitivity, that I really do appreciate now, and that I think helps me become a better teacher. Yeah.
Thank you.
So my question is really in two parts. So you mentioned that this particular project was part of a larger project, and I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about that larger project. And then the second question is, how did you choose this specific piece to put forward for the award?
Right, okay. So yes, this is a part of a larger project. So the larger project really is looking at how Chinese international students experience their college education in the US. And the experiences are both about what are the joys that they experience as well as the challenges they experience. Because I didn't want to just talk about challenges only because I felt like there's a lot of research that's talking about challenges students face. Because so I want to show something positive that they were experiencing. And also, beyond their experiences, I wanted to also understand how they interpreted their experiences from a social cultural lens. What about their own, background environments contributed to them, their own personal history, and what about the new environment contributed to that? So I really want to go in deep to find out, these, using like ethnographic tools to really understand the issues that they face. And beyond that, I also wanted to see how they changed over time, as well as how they responded. Because I think that if we simply talk about student challenges, it's problematic because it seems as if, our students are cast in a light which shows them as, they're needy, or that they're problematic, or that, their issues are static. So I really want to see where was their sense of agency? How are they actually, contributing to the changes, responding to these tensions around them? And for that, I think I found really interesting insights and which I really enjoyed. So this was really much larger project. And from this much larger research, I carved out different pieces, you know, of papers which I wrote. And now on to your second question about why is it that I chose this piece for this to submit to NAFSA. Before I answer that question, I want to make one caveat, and it is that I'm going to admit that this is not the first time I'm submitting an application to NAFSA. And I really want to say that because I think that it's important for everyone here to know that, because oftentimes we'll look at somebody getting an award and we think, wow, this person got an award, that's fantastic, right? But we don't hear about the background and the number of failures this person has had before he or she arrives at that spot. So I just want to make it clear out there to everybody that this is not the first time I've applied. This is actually the second time I've applied, right? And so to those of you who may be considering, you know, submitting for the award as well, so please feel encouraged by my circumstances. Now onto your question about why this piece. I think I briefly mentioned that in my talk as well as in my earlier part of this response to this question, that I really wanted to speak beyond just problems. I really wanted to go deep into looking at things from an ethnographic lens, because I feel like there's work talking about cultural differences, but a lot of the work talking about cultural differences tend to use Confucianism or language as a way to explain away everything. And I feel like there's actually a lot more. And in the case of China, where the society is actually changing so rapidly, I feel like there are a lot more pieces at play here. So I really wanted to look at what are, you know, the complexity of these interplays of different kind of factors that actually contributes to students' challenges. So that's the reason why I wanted to share this piece. Yep.
Great. Well, we have a lot more questions for you. It looks like many people are excited to hear from you. So our first question comes from Kate Hellman. How do we get the international community to internalize their strengths and understand their own sociocultural lenses? And then how do we empower faculty and staff at institutions of higher education to do the same?
Right. I think it's really important to get the international community to really understand that they have strengths and they do not just have deficits. I think they're so used to hearing about the problems that they face, the issues that they face, that they may come out from this whole experience feeling like, wow, you know, like I have all these gaps that I need to fill, which is true to some extent. Of course, there are issues which they have to work on, like language issues if they're coming from a context with a very different where if they're not familiar with the language, or you know, schooling norms and classroom norms or academic conventions that they have to learn. I mean, that's all part of the learning process. But I think we need to really have conversations with them. So I would say number one is to really have conversations with them, and in these conversations that we have with international students, I think number two, we need to be very explicit. I want to use the word explicit because I feel like in academia is full of implicit norms that people, you know, partake in and participate in, and which we may not be aware of these implicit norms. So I think we need to make some of these norms explicit, just as how we make the norms of behaviors in the new society explicit as well. That can be helpful for them. So in engaging in these conversations with international students, asking them, what challenges do you face? You know, why do you think you have these challenges? And then having somebody actually doing that cultural broking, you know, explaining, oh, this is how things are done in the US and for these reasons. Or let's talk about how things are done in India or how things are done in Namibia or something. Now, why is it that it's done that way and why is it that it's done this way, you know? So having that kind of extended conversation, I think is helpful in letting them see that, oh, okay, it's not that where I'm coming from is inferior, but it's just that we're doing things differently. And we're doing things differently because we have very different, you know, history, we have very different politics, we have very different, you know, geography and environment or education. So I think these extended conversations are very necessary. I also think it's helpful for them to understand that their adjustment is actually over a period of time. You know, that, you know, actually I wrote a paper on that before, you know, talking about how, you know, when international students adjust to a new environment, it's almost like a zigzag curve going up. it's like they find that they're getting better at something, but then they go to the second year and they find that there are new challenges, so things dip again, and then they go up again. So I think for them to actually recognize that this is a very real process that everyone experiences, and it's not just them, can be very helpful for them. And the second part of the question was on how to actually empower staff and faculty. I have to say it's not easy, because when I think about my own colleagues right now, and I'm sure for many of you, in the work that you do and that you're engaged in, you often run up against these challenges, of trying to help your colleagues, better understand international students' issues. I think that diversity workshops can be very helpful. Diversity workshops which actually try to simulate what it might be like to be an international student or to be a student from a minoritized community can be helpful. I also think that I actually think it's really odd in some ways if you think about it, that whenever we have orientations for international students, but we don't have orientations for staff or faculty members on internationalization on campus. So I think that maybe we might be doing our staff and faculty members a service if we actually talk to them about what are the school's internationalization policies and plans, and why these are taking place and how it will affect their lives. Because I think that if they're aware of what's going on, they may then feel like, oh, okay, this is something that I would have to learn to adjust to. Right? So having that conversation, letting them be aware of what's going on around internationalization on campus could be helpful for them. And providing them with resources can also be helpful. So as I mentioned in my talk earlier, in my sharing, when I was talking with my professor and she was talking about, reading like Lenora Chu's book about called Little Soldiers, and she's like, wow, that opened her eyes into a different world of what schooling looked like in a different context. So if we can provide like a list of resources for the faculty members and staff about, schooling, what schooling looks like around in different parts of the world. There's a great documentary called Schooling the World. What, experiences of children are like growing up in different countries and cultures. All that can be very helpful, I think. Yeah. So that's a fairly long answer to the two-part question.
It's fantastic. As a sociologist, you are speaking my language, so I'm with you on this. I find myself saying all the time to people, as professors, we're not trying to teach people to be psychic, right? We have to actually tell people stuff. I love your answer. And I have another question, which it does really relate to what you were saying, and I think it's a perfect follow-up. So this question is from Rachel Elliott. Considering the importance of using a strengths-based approach, do you think there is still value in having conversations with international students about the anticipated challenges and adjustments they may have and need to make? How do we balance discussing strengths and also being realistic about the real challenges that may arise for students?
Well, yeah, I absolutely think that we need to have conversations about their challenges, for sure. I think that in the work that in the research that I do and in the articles that I read and the arguments that I put forth, I'm not saying that we don't talk about challenges. I think that we should not only talk about challenges, right? So because a lot of the discussions have been focused only on challenges. So beyond talking about challenges, which I think is important, because I think like, I'm sorry, I missed out the person's name who asked this question.
Rachel.
Like Rachel's question, right? I think it's true that they need to be realistic, that yes, there are going to be challenges. It's not going to be a walk in the park being an international student wherever you are, be it an American student in Prague or in Cuba, or, a Zimbabwean student in South Africa. So I think that these conversations around challenges are definitely needed and need to be explicitly decoded. I also think that maybe what might be interesting would be to ask students, what do you think are some strengths that you have? And how do you think some of the strengths that you have can be used to actually attend to these challenges? So flipping it around, instead of just asking them what are the challenges you have, let's talk about what do you think are some strengths you have, from your growing up, from your experiences. How do you think you can sort of like position these strengths and to use it to work with your challenges? So let me give you an a couple of examples. So in some of the in my research, so I was looking at students' coping strategies. How did they cope when they're in a US context, right, when faced with these challenges? So a few things. My students said they're very used to working hard. In China, they wake up at 6 a.m., right? And there's, exercises. And then after that, they study the whole day up till 11 p.m. or midnight. And it's that sense of working hard, relentless working, which they feel like they can actually bring with them in the US. They use that sense of work ethic is how they try to overcome the challenges they face, So they just try to put a lot more time, spend a lot more time in the library, and so on and so forth. But it's not just working hard too. I mean, some of them realize that, here are my strengths. I noticed that I'm actually better than some of my domestic peers in math and science. So they actually offer to tutor their domestic peers in math and science, and then ask the peers, oh, well, actually, do you think you can help me look over some of my papers for over my writing and so on and so forth. So you see, that's how they're actually partly using their strengths actually overcome their weaknesses or the challenges they face. Okay, so doing that can actually help them see that, oh, actually, there are good things in myself, for my own education, that I can use in this new context. Yeah. So I hope that answers Rachel's question.
I love that. I think what we're hearing from you today, really the opportunity to look at both those strengths and those challenges is coming through. And I love that. So Greg Brubaker has a question here about your actual research.
Mm-hmm.
So did you, in your research, differentiate undergraduate students between those who participated in international preparation high school versus those who studied the standard Chinese curriculum and then just studied for the IELTS or the SAT after school?
Yes, thank you very much, Greg, for the question. So when I was recruiting participants, I actually wanted to recruit participants who have no experience studying outside of China. And minimally, I recruited participants who actually who are actually taking part in these schools which were preparing them for study abroad. So most of my participants really, I think I had 18 participants. I think 17 out of 18 of them were actually in a normal Chinese high school preparing for the common examination. And only one of them was actually in a so-called international, sort of a high school that was preparing them for study abroad. Yeah. And I find that because it's a 17 versus 1, I don't think I can make any claims about, that difference in experiences between these two groups. So I'm sorry, Greg, that I cannot give more nuance in my response to you.
Thank you for that. So we do have another question. We talk extensively about supporting international students in navigating the university environment, both inside and outside of the classroom. Discussion and group work in the classroom, memorization of history and new facets of that. So how do we flip such things to get faculty to consider the linguistic aspects as well as the frameworks of the Chinese educational system? So, for example, how do we get people to really think about those diverse groups of students when they're looking forward and planning how they will be teaching? And this also comes from Kate Hellman.
Hi, Kate. Great questions, Kate. So again, I think that diversity workshop is helpful for faculty, but I'm going to say something else, which is that I think actually in general, all faculty will benefit from just good teaching practices. Sometimes faculty members are good researchers, but that may not necessarily make them good teachers. And even just fundamental good pedagogy can, just going for pedagogical training or workshops or professional development can actually be very, very helpful. So even workshops like universal design for learning, right? Universal design for learning is, when one practices the principles of UDL, universal design for learning, it's not like as if I'm only designing lessons for international students. If I'm actually understanding the principles and the philosophies behind universal design for learning or differentiated instruction, then at the heart of it is about understanding where students are coming from. And if we are interested in understanding where students are coming from, regardless of what nationality they're coming from and their backgrounds and so on and so forth, we will become more sensitized to students' different backgrounds, and that can feed into our work. So to begin, I would say having really good teaching learning support for faculty members on pedagogy, on student sensitivity can be actually helpful to begin with. And then, okay, if we then want to layer, if we want to put on another layer to this and talk about international students, then I think that having these resources can be helpful in terms of watching videos about what international students' lives are like, what the education system is like, and so on and so forth. So I think Michigan State University, Briggs wrote a really good article about capturing what Michigan State University has been doing, because Michigan State University actually, as with many other colleges in the US, face a very large increase or enrollment of Chinese international students. So what some of the faculty members did is that they actually created a documentary capturing international students' issues, and then they showed it to faculty members. And I think that was very helpful because it was created by a faculty member and for other faculty members. So I think they were, faculty members themselves were a lot more responsive to that kind of resources. So that's an idea as well. Yeah.
I think everyone in this meeting started to smile and shake their heads at you when you said that. I think we all agree, and I love it. Kate said in the chat, I don't know if you saw it, she said, "You're singing my song."
Oh, so, wow, Kate.
I think that's lovely. Excellent. So I think at this point, oh my goodness, this was just fantastic, and we've loved hearing from you. But I think moving on from peppering you with questions and all of us in the same space where we're happy to hear and learn today, I think that Ji Young is going to bring us into the next portion of our program, which is to talk about this award that you've won and how people can get involved. So again, thank you so much for this. I know we'll have more thank yous as we come to the end of the program. But Ji Young, back to you.
Sure. Thanks, Holly. And thanks, Dr. Heng, again, for your wonderful presentation and conversations. And I think we are, very much aspiring to create an inclusive living and learning environment for our international students that are strength-based, not the deficit-based. Not that we are ignoring the deficits, but actually, putting forward those support structure and the campus environment where we want to listen and we want to really better understand and engage our students, again, from those inclusive and social culturally attuned, way. And so again, I want to take this time to thank Dr. Heng for sharing her research and insight with all of us today. And before we close out the event, we want to provide time for everybody attending here to ask us any questions about the innovative research in International Education Award. And as Dr. Heng has mentioned that, it's okay, let's kind of put forward and, if it's just the practice of, putting and recognizing and uplifting those peer research in the field. And submissions are now being accepted through February 1st. So if you have any questions, please ask them now or send them directly to us at TLSKC@nafsa.org. So, if you have any questions about the award, or any suggestions for the award, please feel free to share with us. So there's this one question from Shana. So, what kind of topics are considered good candidates for selected publications for this award? This is innovative research in international education that is really sort of comprehensive in any kind of aspects of international education. And I want to invite either Melissa or Holly or NAFSA members or anybody in this chat who want to maybe give some examples.
I'm happy to chime in here. As being the in the chair stream now for 2 years, starting my third, this is my absolute favorite thing to do every year is to read the articles that are submitted. And one of the reasons is that they're so broad and vast. They come from all different fields, and you can tell that so many of them are looking at international education in this world from so many lenses and trying to move us forward and to present research. And the example you've seen today is just the perfect example of this. So I agree with you, Ji-young. First of all, we encourage people to apply. It's part of the process of becoming a scholar, of going in and getting yeses and getting nos and making changes and trying again. And I also think that to really consider that all research areas, you may, I'm a sociologist, you may be coming from that type of a background, and those topics coming in that are helping us understand the field and move forward. And I've got to say it, this time of the world, right? These new teaching and learning practices, this new way that we're all participating in different ways in internationalization. I think those would be great topics we'd love to see. I'm sure Melissa has some ideas as well.
Well, and so I'll add to that. One thing that I think is somewhat unique in the field about the TLS Award is the applied focus of the award. And so it's not just that it's exemplary research on a topic defined very broadly that applies to international education, but that it is also useful research that is particularly useful and applicable to practice. So that's what I would add to what Holly already mentioned about the award, is that applicability piece.
Mm-hmm. Last year's the Innovative Award, we're also excited because not only because of the excellent topic that Dr. Heng has submitted, but also the idea that we are leveraging the international voices. Typically the international education and the research that has been done and recognized so far are mostly driven by the Western researchers or the universities and cases that are happening in the US basis or Western Europe. And, this year, TLS, we are trying to diversify the voices, from the scholars and the students and researchers. There are not only from the Western side, but, the global voices that we can recognize. So again, I'd like to highly recommend that and encourage those applications and nominations that are exactly doing that to help us recognize and celebrate the global voices in international education. The next question I have is that what types of publications are considered acceptable for this award?
Hi, Ji-young. I can actually answer that question. So publications should be either individual or co-authored, with the award candidate being either listed as first or second author. So it could be a journal article, it could be a book chapter, or another chapter in an edited volume. But the most important thing is that it's been published within the past 3 years. So it needs to be within the past 3 years or forthcoming and accepted for publication. And each submission needs to focus on a single publication that presents the research relevant to international education, as Holly and Melissa had mentioned earlier. But really, it doesn't matter if you've published 10 articles in the last year or 2 articles or even 1. Each submission can only focus on one, and that can be either through nomination or self-application. So if you've read something that's been really excellent, or one of your colleagues has published something recently, you can also put forth that as a nomination as well.
Thank you. And, this innovative research really gives the field innovative ideas. And I think this is really a really good time that we can use some innovative ideas as a field to move out of the pandemic and reimagine our international education post-pandemic. And again, I think that the diverse topics and perspectives that can really fuse the field with, innovative ideas will be excellent. Another question is, when is the final deadline for submissions for the 2022 cycle? So I know that February 1st is the deadline. Is there any other timeline that we have to remind it? Okay. So it's a couple of weeks, folks. And so again, strongly recommend to, help us celebrate, again, innovative research in the field. Okay, is there any other questions or comments about the award itself?
I don't see any in the chat at this point. If anybody does have further questions, feel free to email them to us at tlskc@nafsa.org.
All right. So I have a final question. We have about 5 minutes left. And two final questions to Dr. Heng or TLS KC or NAFSA or all attendees here. What advice would you give to somebody starting out in the field and or wanting to share their work with others, but not knowing how or where to start? So if you have, you know, some research ideas or, you know, maybe kind of put your foot in the field and, you know, teaching research and scholarship areas or any, you know, practical areas, you know, how would you recommend or advise those who, in terms of, you know, how to start and where to start? Any advice or answers if you want to share in the chat or share verbally?
Well, I'm happy to start off first. I think for myself, I would say to put yourself out there, because the first place that I shared my research with was back to the international student offices, reaching out to international student offices to ask if they're interested in hearing about my research. I've also found that the STAR Scholars Network, which is actually partnered with the Journal of International Students, is a great community to be a part of. The STAR, S-T-A-R, STAR Scholars Network. So as with the Critical Internationalization Network, so these are some networks that you can consider forming partnerships with or building community with and joining. And I will let the rest of you take over.
Thank you, Dr. Heng. Any other, yes?
Yeah, so my advice would be pretty similar, I think, is just to cast your net pretty broadly in terms of events that you attend, people you get to know, who you talk to about your research, and just putting yourself out there and making those connections. I know that's something that I did when I first started doing research, and it really served me well because now I know a whole lot of people in the field. I think that may be a bit easier now because we have events like this one that you can attend, you know, virtually and get to know people that way. So that would be my first piece of advice as well.
Thank you. Yes, definitely, you know, taking advantage of the networking opportunities through NAFSA or a similar professional field, as you'll be surprised how many people are actually having similar questions or similar challenges. And by connecting and sharing your ideas or challenges, that lead to you know, future opportunities and possibilities. And I really welcome those, you know, questions that come through the NAFSA network, where somebody has some ideas to co-present if there are any similar you know, interests out there they want to work together. Oftentimes that's how you really get your ideas out there and you know, start forming those partnerships. Any other ideas or advice or suggestions from the audience?
I was going to say, Jiyoung, get involved with the TLS knowledge community.
Absolutely. So in TLS, we have 3 different kinds of knowledge network. One is internationalizing teaching and learning, and also intercultural communication and training, and knowledge, research and scholarship network. And so, you know, they are filled with a lot of resources, toolkits, and excellent community that, you know, again, have similar interests and, you know, passion for, you know, advancing our international education. And okay, so if there are no other comments or questions, again, I want to thank you all for joining us today. And don't forget to submit an application on that or nomination for the 2022 Innovative Research in International Education Award by February 1st, 2022. The recording of today's session will be available soon on the NAFSA website. Thank you again for joining us, and you have a wonderful day.